Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Clear Disparity, New Data Adds Consumer Voices to Award Letter Confusion Debate. My name is Barry Richardson, and I'm the Product Marketing Specialist here at Campus Logic. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. You can adjust your audio settings in the bottom left-hand corner. The sound quality appears to be best if you dial in from a phone as opposed to using your computer speakers. Please submit any questions throughout the webinar by typing into the questions area on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll collect them and address them during our Q&A at the end. We'll also be emailing you a recording of today's webinar. Our speakers today are Carlos Salerno, Vice President of Research at Campus Logic, and Amy Glynn, Vice President of Student Financial Success. Carlo joined Campus Logic in 2018, leading research initiatives key to student financial success. Over a 19-year career, he has done higher education research for the federal government, co-founded an education analytics company, advised European and African education ministries, and conducted a range of analytical studies for national advocacy groups and the student lending industry. Amy joined Campus Logic in 2013 after a decade in the FinAid office, focused on helping colleges and universities deliver student financial success through automation, advising, and analytics. Amy champions ideas that can help turn the tide for the nearly 3 million students who drop out of higher education every year for reasons related to finances. Student financial success has become a strategic imperative for all higher education institutions, and Amy often lends her voice to policy discussions focused on improving accessibility, driving informed borrowing, and increasing completion. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to Amy.
Perfect, thanks, Barry. On behalf of Carlo and I, we would just like to thank everybody who has joined us today. And we really look forward to and are excited about having this conversation with you guys today. So to start off, we just wanted to welcome people and to give a little bit of background for those that aren't familiar with Campus Logic. We're a software as a service company located in Phoenix with a mission to help schools change lives. To do that, we focus on increasing student financial success by reducing the number of students who leave school each year due to financial difficulties. When we look at student success, we see it as a three-legged stool of academic, career, and financial success. Over the years, organizations have invested heavily in both academic and career success while neglecting the financial success. The significant underinvestment has left both schools and students at a disadvantage. The solution is to turn our attention to scalable initiatives that focus on automation, analytics, and advising within the financial aid office. So today, we are going to talk a little bit about kind of the problem and the background of why we did this research. We're going to talk about the insights and overview of the results, what it means to the community and the industry at large, and then hopefully if Carlo and I have not talked for 60 straight minutes, we should leave around 20 minutes to be able to answer any questions that you guys have from the audience. So please remember to don't hold those questions to the end. Feel free to put them into the chat or the question dialog box as we move through, and we will address them as we get to them. So to start things off, if people have kind of taken a look at our research, they know that we talk a lot about needing to test and knowing what communications are actually doing. So you will see a poll has just appeared on screen that asks if your institution has consumer tested any of your notification templates that you are currently using. So we'll leave this up for about 25, 30 more seconds, give people an opportunity to respond. The options are, yes, you've tested with students, yes, you've tested with parents, yes, with students and parents, no, you haven't tested, or I know we have some people from policy and advocacy groups who this may not apply to. And I think we're gonna pull up the results here and just see where people kind of stand. And it looks like we have couple of institutions that have tested with parents, around 17%. A few that have tested, also one tested with students and parents, but the majority of organizations really haven't had an opportunity to test and or it's not applicable. And the reality is that's really common, right? We have a lot of things on our plate, especially within the aid office, focusing on compliance, regulatory, student support, and so the ability to test is definitely something that we highlight as an area of opportunity for institutions to partner with other groups to be able to manage that testing. And so when we look at kind of why we did this, why did we look at award letters? Because award letters have an opportunity to actually be a shepherd of people through the higher education journey or to really be a block for them. And when you look at it, we have $240 billion awarded each year in federal and state aid. And that number is only growing as we have more investment and more opportunity. And the primary means of communicating those dollars to students is through the award letter or the award notification. And if students and families can't understand the information that's coming on those award notifications, then they can't make a good financial decision for themselves. 3 million is the number of students who drop out of higher education every year due to financial reasons. The financial crisis that we're facing in higher ed, I believe, doesn't sit solely on loan debt or full indebtedness, but instead it rests with students who have debt but no degree because they are not in a position to actually be able to better themselves. And one of the best ways that we can drive this number down is by better communicating to students about true cost, affordability, and their options to be able to cover the expenses of a college. And 8 is the number of active pieces of federal legislation that relate to award notifications at this point in time. This doesn't take into account any state initiatives that are going into place or any organizational initiatives. But as we've seen in the past, and you will see going forward, the template that we tested was actually one that was produced by the CFPB and the Department of Education. And when we end up with templates that are highly overly structured, that don't allow for personalization, we actually end up with increased confusion. So this is an opportunity for everybody on the line to use data to begin to advocate for what is needed at both the federal and state policy level.
So let's talk a moment about the research itself. We're not the first people to try and do research on award letters, right? We know in recent months, especially U Aspire and New America Foundation had done a report that looked at the disparity in the types of award letter templates that are used and the disparity in the types of wording that can be used to address similar concepts. We know NASPA has done a good deal of work as well around trying to understand aid award letter confusion and trying to unpack some of the challenges in some of these templates. What we wanted to know is what people who have to read and act on these letters actually don't get. And so, like Amy said, right, if you're going to do a study like this, we need to have some kind of baseline. And so we ended up adopting the college financing plan, which is the image that you see on the right, right? We wanted something that, again, was representative. We know that up to 3,000 schools had said in the past that they would be using the financial aid shopping sheet. So this felt like the most broad-based template we could work from. It's widely recognized. You will see, for those of you who are familiar with the college financing plan, that this image on the right looks different than what we see today in the actual financing plan. That's because we had the beta version of it available when we actually did the results itself. And so you could see what we did is we grouped the award letter template into 8 different areas, from expected family contribution and cost of attendance down to net cost, work experience, loan options. And we're going to talk about more of that later as we dig into the actual slides themselves. So what do we do? You can see the numbers. I'm not gonna talk to those numbers directly, but we did a substantial amount of consumer surveying. The one number that I will focus on, the 230 industry experts, that includes a range of people. We talked to financial aid office experts. We talked to folks who work specifically in what we would call the student financial success space. We talked to policymakers. We talked to advocacy organizations. It really represents a wide array of folks who touch financial success in different aspects of the student's experience. We partnered with a company called EMI Research Solutions to actually do the student and parent surveying, and we ran this study between the end of July and beginning of August of this year. So let's jump into the findings. Let's talk about what we found. So the first slide we're looking at here, right, captures just the basic thing. Who found things unclear? And in fact, it turns out that a lot of people find things unclear. 3 out of 5 parents found wording unclear, and anywhere between 60% and 70% of student respondents either found wording or numbers unclear, right? Is that a lot? To be honest, we don't have a baseline. We don't know what a lot of confusion looks like, but intuition does tell us that that feels like a pretty high number. I think the main point that I would leave this slide with is that when it comes to confusion, right, like it's not just words and it's not just numbers, right? There's confusion all over the place. And I think that's one of the big challenges that we've already not really spent a lot of time talking about.
Yeah, and I think, so 2 things for me. Are the numbers high? If our student population in our data set had been predominantly high school students, would I have said that 60 or 70% blew me out of the water? Maybe, maybe not. But when we talk about 94% of the student respondents that we had some college, and 64% of them held a degree, saying that people who had seen similar language, similar terminology and award letters in the past are confused at a 60%, 70% clip. That to me seems extreme,
yeah.
Right? And when we talk about the award notification, I think of it a lot as the first impression, right? We say that we build first impressions when we're talking to people, and I don't know, something crazy like under 5 seconds, right? You already make a decision about someone. And so when you think about the award notification, that impression is about cost and affordability. Can I afford to go to your institution? Can I not? And these notifications are going to deeply impact students' perception of their ability to attend an institution, and in both ways, right? Like you can create false hope, and you can create false doom when it's not necessary.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So if we spend a little more time talking about the difference between word and number confusion, these are tables from the actual report, and you can see, right, not only did we ask, folks to literally look at the template and say, hey, what words are you confused by and what numbers do you find unclear? But we also asked people to explain why they were confused, right? Because if we don't understand what confuses them, it's really difficult to build policy around ways to sort of rectify those problems. And you can see that different patterns emerge. And just for everybody on the webinar, by the way, right, I know some of these tables are small, and depending on the screen size that you're looking at, you may have trouble seeing this. The webinar deck itself is going to be available to all the participants after the event is over. So you'll be able to grab all these. You'll be able to look at these in closer detail at a later time as well. So I just want to highlight a couple things here, right, that I think really stand out when we break out word confusion and number confusion. And the first is a commonality, and that's expected family contribution. Like a lot of folks seem to get tripped up, whether it's the words or the numbers. Expected family contribution, that whole block seems to trip a lot of folks up. It's confusing. But then if we break down and we look, if we look at the different types of confusion, you actually see some different kinds of patterns emerge. So if we look at the number confusion, for example, right, among students and parents who said, I don't know why a number is relevant, like only 5% of them selected net costs. But amongst those who said, I don't know how a number was calculated, almost 15% of them selected net costs. So you can see that, similar concept, but different levels of confusion. And that translates as well to the word confusion side as well. If we look at cost of attendance, for example, where again, if we look at the respondents who said, I don't understand what a word means, only 6% said cost of attendance was something that they didn't understand the actual words or the concepts. But amongst those who said, hey, the wording that I'm looking at is too vague, almost 20% of them focused on cost of attendance, right? Those disparities matter.
Well, and when we're talking about, the idea that this is really the blueprint for college cost and affordability, when we see that many people confused about cost elements, you would never buy any other major item in your life, a house, a car, anything, and say, yeah, I'm not really sure how much it costs. Like that's the fundamental building block of making a good financial decision about the college education that you're investing in. And it goes to the point, right? All of this confusion around words and numbers just tells us that what we're investing in financial literacy and what we're doing to try and help students to understand these things, they're not coming to fruition, right? Again, I'm going to keep going back to 94% of the respondents have gone through financial aid before. They've seen the award notification. Chances are they've gone through entrance counseling. 64% of them have graduated. They've gone through exit counseling. They've had access to institutional resources. And those financial literacy resources, or whatever we want to call them, they're just not getting the job done. And we need to find a way to better invest those dollars in tools that will help students.
Yeah, imagine if you had to buy a new car and look at that sticker on the window, right? And you didn't understand what a translock differential is on your four-wheel drive. What does that tell you?
Or why I'm paying $6,000 for it.
Or what if it says, hey, you can get trim package A or B, but it doesn't tell you what's in trim package A or trim package B. How do you make a decision? That's a fine example of something that's just too vague. So they're good points, and I think they're the things that don't get highlighted in the discussion enough.
Yeah.
So Insight 3 is actually new data. This is stuff that we did not have in the report. In the report, we combined student and parent information together. So here we actually broke out word confusion into what parents and students each individually identified versus lumping them together. And I want to just highlight here just a couple things, right? One, if we look at loan options, right? It doesn't matter if folks didn't understand what it meant, why they needed to know it, or whether it was too vague. What I want to point out here is that students systematically struggled more with loan options than parents did. Higher percentages across the board. They just simply had a harder time with the loan section of the award letter template than parents did. And the second thing that I want to highlight is that parents, on the other hand, if you look at why folks said they didn't understand why they needed to know something or whether they found it too vague, parents were far more likely to say, I don't get the net cost aspect of it, right? You look at those numbers here, and for example, in the students' case, only around 8.6% of students who said, I don't understand why I need to know a number, or 7.1%, sorry, had said net costs, but almost 12.5% of parents did. And only 8.7% of students who thought the wording was too vague, focused on net cost, but almost 14% of parents did, right? So again, as you unpack this and you break it out, we actually start to see systematic patterns that show, and it's important because, right, students and parents both have to read these letters, Amy, right?
Yeah, I think we've seen the shift more and more that the buying committee around educational choices, it's not a student decision, it's not a parent decision, it's the entire buying committee. And that means that, when we look at shifts here culturally in the United States, that's parents and students and sometimes grandparents and aunts and uncles are coming in, and those are cross generationally. We need to be able to address the variation within the communication to make sure that the entire buying committee is bought in, because funding and education is not done by a single person any longer. It's done by an entire family unit. And the future family unit feels the consequences of the buying choices of the student, right? Like my husband and daughter feel the consequences of the buying decisions I made 10 years ago when I was getting my master's degree. And so it's something that we need to be conscious of in how we communicate and make sure it's accessible cross-generationally.
Yeah, no, I struggle with this idea that we have things like expected family contribution, right? But at the end of the day, these letters go to students, right? We know parents have to read these letters. We know parents have to act on these letters oftentimes as much as students do. And so we spend a lot of time designing these things for one subject or for one part of the population without recognizing that lots of folks have to read this and have to actually make decisions, right? This is a letter that has to be acted upon, right? There's something that has to come out of this, getting this information. And that's sort of an assessment of, can I afford to go to this school? And if I decide yes, right, how am I going to pay for it? This letter is supposed to give me the blueprint for helping me figure out how to go forward. And so
it's actually what makes it even more difficult is the fact that we are trying to communicate to so many different populations with so many unique needs. That this is one of those problems that if there was an easy solution, the industry would have already
found it. Yeah, exactly, for sure. So and so maybe that split out of that between parents and students, it ties nicely into sort of the age discussion as well. So this again, Insight 4 is also from the report. And what we were trying to unpack here again was the idea that do folks, from different age start points, express confusion for different reasons? And it turns out, unsurprisingly, that it does, right? Younger respondents, right, we're more apt to say, hey, I don't understand what words mean, right? Like you look across the board and you can see on that top row, for example, almost 27% of 18 to 24-year-olds, where, amongst the folks who said, I don't understand what a term means, like overwhelmingly, like the majority was almost 18 to 31-year-olds, and a lot of them were 18 to 24-year-olds, right? While on the other hand, you look at older respondents in our survey and you see that they were less likely to say that they didn't understand what a word meant. Like look at the 39 to 45-year-olds, only 16.5% of them said, I don't get what it means. But they were far more apt to say, I don't understand why I need to know this, or this is too vague for me. And so, I don't know, Amy, maybe you can talk to this a little bit, but intuitively that feels like it makes sense. But before we jump into that, we also, let me add something else to the mix around age. This is something that's also wasn't in the report. This is some new data. Again, what we decided to do was sort of break out and ask, do different age groups find different areas of the award letter confusing? And again, I think the answer is yes, right? You look at a table like this, and we see loan options, for example, and you can see that, younger respondents, those folks that were either 18 to 31 years old, were far more likely to again say that they struggled with the numbers in the loan options section. While at the same time, like older respondents, everybody from 32 onwards almost, right, said, we're looking at these supplementary numbers, we're looking at these graduation rates and median borrowing things, and we don't get these numbers. We don't get where they come from. And so once again, I think what we have here is a case of some systematic patterns that probably have some logical or intuitive explanations.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I totally agree, but I'm going to take this opportunity first to continue to beat my drum around EFC elimination, because you'll see regardless of age, there is significant confusion around the expected family contribution and why it's present on the award letter.
That's a good point.
But the difference around age, I just feel like we've put data around the duh moment, right? Like, of course, and maybe this is me getting older and being a parent a parent who monitors my child's Instagram and text messages and finds myself Googling on a daily basis what things like sipping the tea mean. And for other people who aren't in the know, it means they're gossiping. Didn't know that. Seriously, the things I have to Google today, it's kind of embarrassing. It's actually embarrassing. It does age me a lot. But it shows you, right? Like, why don't they understand what an EFC means? Why don't they understand these loan options? They're phrases that they're not encountering on a daily basis. And so we do need to find a way of communicating with students in a way that they want to consume the information. And potentially consider that using this notification as a catch-all really is not the best way to do generational communication. I mean, does anybody do a different notification to students versus parents, right? Is anybody doing that to be able to try and address this in a different way? Because there are very definite different needs and different comprehensions.
Right. And again, I would go back to that point, right? That award letters get read by students, but they often get read by parents and interpreted by parents as well. And so if you want to craft a solution, right, around designing a better award letter, on the one hand, you need to recognize who is confused by what, but you also have to recognize who is actually reading these things and who actually has to make a decision, off of it. So, but I also sympathize. Again, I think your point about EFC is noted. And I would even highlight here as well from this table, right? Like across the board, regardless of age, you can see cost of attendance is another one of those big blocks where regardless of whether you're 18 or 59 years old, you seem to struggle with all of those different components that seem to make up cost of attendance.
I thought you were going to sympathize with how old my daughter makes me feel. That's okay.
You decided to reveal how old your children are. I'm not telling anybody how old mine are at this point, but sadly, I'm probably actually in that same boat. And I didn't even understand the T comment. So that makes me even older.
Don't Google it. It's okay.
That's right.
Nothing bad will come up.
That's right. So, obviously, this is another component from the report itself, right? We wanted to look at the relationship between race and ethnicity and confusion. One of the things that we didn't highlight on the table here, but actually shows up in the report, is the idea that just overall, when we asked folks, hey, do you see anything confusing in this letter or not? White respondents compared to all other race and ethnic groups were disproportionately more likely to say, we don't see anything wrong with this. In other words, right, like Black, Asian, Hispanic respondents were more likely across the board to at least find something that was confusing on the letter compared to white respondents. That doesn't show up here, but it does show up in the report. Mm-hmm. But here I just kind of want to focus on the fact that, if we look at the table, right, you can see here, like non-white respondents, for example, seem to have higher levels of number confusion around net costs, for example, right? You can see they consistently, amongst the different groups on the right-hand, table, you can see that notably larger percentages, struggled with the net cost section of the award letter compared to white respondents. But we also see other kinds of patterns that sort of cross over between word and number confusion. So, for example, if we look at something like grants and scholarships, for example, right, we see that Black and Hispanic respondents notably expressed more confusion around the grant and scholarship section of the report when it came to word confusion. But when we look at number confusion, it was actually Asian and Hispanic students that seemed to express the most confusion. So once again, different groups of folks, different parts of the letter, different levels of confusion. Mm-hmm. So.
And this one to me, I think this is one of those areas that I wish we had more data.
Me too.
Right? Because I do think that if we really dig in to the levels of confusion and the types of confusion, that we would see more patterns around economics, around first generation students versus non-first generation students, and being able to understand maybe there, maybe there's just a different way that people are using the award letter, or it serves a different purpose based on background and experiences. So this is definitely one of those places that I wish we had the ability to dig in a little bit more to really be able to figure out kind of what's going on here to be able to make some stronger recommendations.
Yeah, no, I agree as well. I agree as well. And actually, just as a methodology point, something that I haven't touched on, but just for diligent, let me point out. Obviously, we captured far more race ethnicity data than this, but when we start to aggregate the results, right, the numbers and the counts get so small for some of the other groupings, which is why we only report out the major groups here and in the report. Same thing on the age, when you see the age groupings in the slide deck, as you go back and look at it later or look at it in the report, you see we stop at 59, and it doesn't mean that nobody 60 and older didn't respond to our survey. It just means that the population, right, that was responding was small enough that it was just, it was too low to report effectively. So one of the things that I think we did in this report, one of the things that I was really excited about, right, is in addition to being able to sort of table and break all of this out, right, is we had the opportunity to sort of visually depict confusion in a way that we think it hasn't really done before. I mean, we could generate these sort of heat maps of confusion. And so like a slide like this comes from the report. But what we're looking at here on the left-hand side and the right-hand side is student confusion around how numbers get calculated, right? Amongst those students who said, I don't understand how a number is calculated, the left chart shows what student aid experts said, like, here's what I predict students are going to say, I don't understand how this number is calculated. And then the graphic on the right shows what our student response is. So there's some overlap, right? And I think that's good, right? Like, I mean, you can see, for example, like aid experts said that EFC, net cost, parent loans, these are the areas that are going to most likely trip students up. And in fact, you can see that actually turns out to be the case when we look at the graphic on the right. I think what I want to highlight here, though, right, is that students express a lot more confusion than experts, that experts, didn't pick up on, right? Especially around cost of attendance, but also work options, right? Work study options, right? There's just more diversity here. And so I think it's an interesting discussion to say, well, what happens when the folks who need to write these letters and produce these letters and interpret these letters have a different perception about the challenges than the students who have to read them. I don't know, what do you think?
I totally agree. As someone who has tried and failed to design effective award letters over and over and over again in my career, it is not an easy task, right? And so I think what we have to keep in mind here is that this isn't a task that should be left to our legislators. Dear Lord, please don't leave this to the legislators. And it should not be left alone for schools to tackle. This is a global challenge that we have, and we need to make sure that student voices, parent voices, best practices around communication and even marketing approaches are utilized to make sure that there's better comprehension and understanding. And we need to begin to ask ourselves, what are we attempting to accomplish in the goal or what is our goal and what are we attempting to accomplish in when we're communicating, right? Yeah. Because I think that can drive us to have a much more impactful notification. So really beginning to ask those questions.
Yeah, it's a good point. Again, right, like there's a lot that we just don't know about confusion. Confusion is just really complicated and it's deeply personal, right? Mm-hmm. Different people understand different things in different ways, yet a lot of people have to actually act on these things. And that's the great challenge that we have to face. So, I think the last thing that we looked at, jump slides here. The last thing that we looked at here were sort of these like patterns in household income, right? And again, I know this table is very dense. You'll see this in the deck that you can download afterwards, right? But again, I want to point out some of the patterns that we found when people report household income, but also then reported confusion at the same time. And you can see, for example, that lower income folks who report having lower household incomes, disproportionately seem to struggle with concepts like net costs, for example, and loan options compared to folks who report having higher household incomes. At the same time, folks from higher household incomes seem to, again, express more confusion around things like this supplementary information, right? They don't seem to grasp, why information like graduation rates or median borrowing necessarily should or needs to play a role here. So, Amy, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
No, I think that it's one of, household income is obviously one of those pieces of information that we do have access to and that we can use in customizing and personalizing the content. It seems to be kind of realistic that income is going to impact exposure to some of these terminologies and some of the ideas, and we should take that into account when we're communicating with students as we go forward.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, right, like at the end of the day, right, there's some intuition here,
Yeah.
right? Like if you come from a household where maybe you don't often have as much access to financial instruments and loans and the associated financial literacy that comes with it, right? You're just less exposed to concepts, which means you should naturally be more inclined to not understand them. This might be one of the first major purchases in your life, truly major purchases in your life, and you can see where this could be a struggle point.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Absolutely. So I think that our next one is another poll question. And
Let's jump slides here.
so we've talked a lot about there are so many different people who have different needs, and there's all of these different ways that you can slice and dice those. And we've talked about personalization. So we'd really like to know from the audience, how difficult is it for you to personalize the communications that are sent out to students based on specific pieces of data, like household income, year in school, ethnicity. First option is I've never thought through that scenario. Second is possible, but it needs a lot more resources. Third is easy peasy, we've got this. 4 is we've already done it. And 5, for those of you who are out there from other organizations, that option is always there. So we'll give people just a quick second to respond. And we will pull up those results to see where we stand. And it looks like we have a lot of people who have thought about this significantly and they need some more resources. A little over half of our participants say they've thought about it but need more resources. We have 27% who indicate that they haven't really had the time to give it the thought that's necessary. And then we've got one institution who everybody wants to talk to because they've said that they've done it and it's easy. Perfect. And so kind of as we wrap things out and we think about the things that need to change, we really kind of view it in 3 ways. And the first is how we actually complete this, and it's around automation. Automation. That was a really tough word for me to get out here. And we've seen a lot in the news recently about the idea that nudging is failing and it's not possible. And the reality is when we actually dig into it, it's around nudging needing to be highly personalized. and to be able to actually scale personalized nudging and engagement with students, we need to use automation to be able to do that. And that automation needs to be driven by analytics. I often say that the financial aid office is the most data-rich office of any in the entire university system. It's also the most regulated and sometimes the hardest data to get at. But when we can get at it and we can use it to identify better communication strategies, more specific communication strategies and engagement, it can yield the highest level of results in reducing those 3 million students that we lose every year due to financial reasons. And when we combine the automation and the analytics, it allows us to scale and really be able to create high quality advising. And it's not until you can actually scale your operation that it allows you to weed out some of those high level rote-based questions with content and engagement that can take the place and then allows you to focus much more personalized, impactful advising one-on-one with your students and their highest needs.
Yeah, I mean, again, right, like at the end of the day, this is a document to be acted upon, right? Somebody has to use this information and they have to do something with it. So being able to create something that's personalized and being able to sort of leverage the kind of data that we have to sort of make it more personalized, those things make sense, right? The better we can communicate with students, the easier it is for students to make good choices and to make good decisions. And good choices and good decisions have a cascading effect, right? That we think leads to them staying in school and completing and finding dollars and understanding the commitments that they're taking on and a host of other just good financial aid activities.
Yeah,
right?
the other thing is for me, like it's a win when schools are looking at this research, when they're using it, and when they're using it to create the case to make the engagement with the student better, right? And that happens at the federal level, like we're talking about, right? If anybody goes out and looks at any of those pieces of federal legislation that are pending, there are some that are highly restrictive on the institution. And award notifications are one of the key ways that institutions can differentiate, improve return on investment, and can connect with students. So we believe in consistent terminology, consistent calculations, with highly personalized content and delivery to the student to be able to differentiate at a time where enrollment is getting harder and harder, right? I think I saw the other day 57% of four-year institutions didn't hit their enrollment target by July 1. What do you think one of the primary drivers in a student's college choice is?
Can I afford it?
Can I afford it? And where does that start? It starts with the award letter, right?
Sure.
So we all have a role in kind of opening that funnel up to students and to the institution.
That's right.
So I feel like I have blabbed more than enough about my 3 A's, and just want to give an opportunity to open it up for questions. I know we've had a couple of people that have presented questions kind of as we've gone, but feel free, you can enter those into the question section, the chat section, anything that works for the audience.
Yeah. So I see one of the first questions we have is how would you recommend dividing up award letters to parents versus students or some other structure? I mean, I can chime in here first, right? That, you know, again, I feel like parents need an award letter, right? Like relegating parents' options to just, hey, this is how you're going to pay for it is, you know, gives them short shrift to the fact that they play such a very large role for dependent students in helping make those financing decisions, right? Parents need to understand their options. They need to understand how their contributions, you know, fit into the student's financing decision as well. And simply just, I think at this point, relegating them to a line of, well, here's some loan options that you can provide. And if not, you're just going to have to, you know, come up with some dollars. I think we owe it to parents to give them a little more information to help them understand right? Like what their level of obligation would be. I know they can't, I know there's FERPA issues, and I know there's data sharing issues that prevent providing, some levels of detail to parents, right, versus students in this kind of scenario. But I still think that there's room to give parents better information about what they can do to help make college affordable. I don't think we meet it enough right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that when we frame things, we're framing them all towards a singular audience. So I think that there's things that can be done around content creation, video engagement that can be more directive towards parents, that can explain what other parents do, what other resources are available. I think there's also significant improvements that can be made around budgeting tools. To help, right? We see all the time that parents are very confused about the vagueness of cost of attendance.
Right.
So there's something that can be done there to educate around what is this cost of attendance thing? How is it developed? What does it mean? The ideas of direct versus indirect, true cost, right? We see these discussions going on a lot in the advocacy area of higher ed. And I think that we can do a better job of making those resources and tools available to parents.
Yeah.
The resources and tools that they want.
Yeah,
right?
they
Because
want.
they're very different than what the student wants.
That's right. That's right. And I can see another question that we have here is, how can our school better explain confusing terms, right? Again, I think it goes back to one of the last things that you said, right? Is we have information that we want, and there's also the second layer problem of how do we get it, right? Like when it comes to struggling with confusing financial aid terms, nobody wants to admit that they don't understand a concept, right? Nobody wants to admit that they don't understand something financial related, especially in a parent-child relationship. I think there's a lot of parents who would like to explore and better understand these concepts. They need a safe space. They need a place where they can get information. They want a resource that they can A, trust, and B, access at any time of the day, right? Because if I'm a parent, I'm probably working Monday, Friday from 8 to 6 p.m. And maybe my chance to look at and explore a financial aid award letter happens Saturday night from 8 to 11 p.m. or Tuesday from 9 p.m. to midnight, right? Mm-hmm. Are the resources available? Can I find somebody to talk to, or can I find a source, right? Like those are the things I think we need to focus on, is giving people the tools to find trusted information, but also giving them tools that they can use when they need to do it, because we're not all available Monday to Friday, 9 to 5.
Well, I think we also, right, we work at institutions of higher education. Are we pulling in our instructional design team to find out, like, how is it that students are learning best? What resources are they using right now? And guess what? We have enough diversity in our student population that we've got students and we've got parents who are all being educated in the same institution. So we really should be able to learn something about that. Again, going back to my 11-year-old who believes that there is nothing that she can't learn from YouTube, because why would she read it when she can watch the movie? There's a very different way of communicating. The other thing, I was at an event over the summer where we were actually talking about award letter and award letter design, and they brought in individuals who were first generation students and were student advocates. And I asked the person at my table about his experience. He said, I had all kinds of questions. And I said, did you ask them? And he said, no, I was embarrassed because the way the information was presented, it felt like I should have known the answer. Yeah. And I said, well, did you have the school's contact information? He's like, yep, I knew exactly who I was supposed to call, but I wasn't going to call them. Right. So when we talk about even automation and being able to utilize nudging, if you have a chatbot that knows that a student is most likely going to be confused by cost of attendance or EFC, when they open that award letter, can that bot nudge them and reach out and say, hey, just wanted to check in. Did you have any questions? Right. You good on this, that, right? Because it's a safer space when you're interacting with a bot than when I'm sitting across from the table being like, Carlo, I don't know what a loan is.
I don't feel like a Bob
Right.
judges me.
Right. Yeah, I don't.
Right.
But asking the economist what a loan is, I feel like he might judge me.
I see another question came in, says, going back to the information for parents, that an award letter for parents was just a suggestion, right? And the answer is yes. Right? From our, again, we're brainstorming about what does data like this mean, and how can data like this be used to reconceptualize how to present information to folks in a way that they can act upon it and use it. And so, no, we're not saying that a parent financial aid award letter needs to be done, as much as I think we just want to be aware that, again, we finally have data in front of us that really points to the fact that students and parents look at the award letter differently, and the things that they grasp and don't grasp are different, and the reasons why they don't grasp them are different. And I know this has been a stool that I've been standing on through this whole webinar, right? But it's a family financing decision for a large percentage of dependent students, right? Yeah. I understand independent students are a different group, but like where parents are concerned in the mix, right? Like I think more clear information helps. It can't hurt, right? At the end of the day. But for the first time, again, we have data, we have numbers, we have research, we have evidence to support the fact that confusion is far more complicated than we give it credit for in a lot of our policy discussions and policy debates. Mm-hmm. And so if we're going to talk about confusing financial aid award letters, we need to talk about who's confused and why they're confused if we're going to be able to develop smart solutions to make it better.
And there's just, to your point, there's generational confusion, right? And so we need to be able to address these because, again, going back to my own personal situation, thinking that my child in 7 or 8 years is going to be able to make a decision on her own about the college education that our family can afford is ridiculous. Right. That is a discussion that is going to be had between her, my husband, and myself, and it's a family decision. And there's so much information about our finances that she doesn't have access to. If I can't consume the information, if I can't understand how much an education is going to cost her and what resources are available to fund it, I can't help her make a good decision.
Yeah, I agree. No, this has been great. So I think we want to be respectful of everybody's time. These are some good questions. Amy, do we have one more poll question here?
We do, and it's really just your opportunity to tell me how awesome I am, and Carlo, of course, how much even more awesome he is. We should split this out into 2 questions.
Like we had this last time.
We did, totally. I'm still on this kick. So anyway, would just love to hear your feedback on how useful the webinar was for you guys, and appreciate your time. You will see when you get the deck that we also contain all of our contact information in the deck, and Carlo and I will both be at FSA coming up in Reno, and so would love to connect with anybody who wants to just chat award letter data or anything else within the industry. Look forward to getting to see everybody there.
Yeah, exactly. And so thank you again, right? Again, we're excited to do research like this. We think findings like these are important. We think people haven't seen findings like this before. We think there's room for discussion and debate, and we also think that there's opportunities for folks in the financial aid community and the student financial success community writ large to be able to act on that kind of data and help everybody move the ball in the direction we want to, which is, more folks making better decisions and getting through the pipeline and getting the credentials that they need to build better lives for themselves. So thank you again. And obviously, if anybody has any questions about the report, Amy and I are both available. You can reach out to us separately, like she said, and we're happy to answer any technical questions. We're happy to talk in greater detail about what any of this means. But thank you again. Thanks for attending.
Have a great day.
Take care.